My name is Vanessa, and at 32 years old, I never expected my own father to ban me from our family Christmas party. I built my tech career in private away from my family, who always favored my younger brother Jake. When Dad called to uninvite me, saying my presence might overshadow Jake and his new successful girlfriend, something inside me finally broke. I had no idea that 3 months later, Jake would walk into my office for a job interview, completely unaware that I was the CEO. If you are enjoying this already, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I became the CEO who would eventually interview my own brother. Trust me, the family drama gets so much more intense from here. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our family seemed picture perfect from the outside. My parents, George and Martha Wilson, had good jobs, a nice house, and 2 healthy children. But inside those walls, the family dynamic was anything but balanced. From as early as I can remember, my younger brother Jake, 4 years, my junior, was the golden child, despite his distinctly average achievements. When Jake brought home a C+ on his report card, my parents would take him out for ice cream to celebrate his improvement. When I brought home straight, as the response was always the same, a quick nod and some variation of, "That is what we expect from you, Vanessa." The disparity was so constant that it became our family's unspoken normal. My parents never missed a single one of Jake's baseball games, even when his team was on a 15-game losing streak, and he spent most of his time warming the bench. But when I qualified for the national debate championship in my junior year, my mother claimed a migraine, and my father suddenly had an unmovable work commitment. I took the bus to the competition alone, won first place, and came home to find them watching Jake play video games on the couch. "Your brother needs the support more than you do," my father would say whenever I expressed disappointment. "You are so independent, Vanessa. Jake needs more guidance." High school graduation made the disparity impossible to ignore. Jake received a brand new Ford Mustang for graduating with a 2.8 GPA. I graduated as valedictorian 3 years earlier and received luggage. "For your journey ahead," my mother had said with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. The message was clear: Jake was meant to stay, and I was meant to go. My mother, Martha, was the chief defender of this imbalance. "Boys develop differently," she would explain, when I questioned why Jake never had to do chores while my list grew longer. "Your brother is sensitive. He needs more time to find himself." By 16, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week, while Jake at 12 could not even make himself a sandwich. George, my father, had his own justifications. "The world is harder for young men these days," he would insist. "Girls have all these special programs and advantages now." This from the man who refused to pay for my college application fees while setting aside money for Jake's future fraternity dues. The pattern forced me to develop independence and resilience early. While other kids had parents checking their homework, I was teaching myself calculus from library books. While friends had their parents drive them to social events, I was figuring out bus schedules and saving babysitting money for movie tickets. The constant feeling of being second best created a hollow space inside me that no academic achievement could fill. I tried everything to win their approval: perfect grades, extracurricular leadership, community service, even learning to make my father's favorite desserts from scratch. Nothing changed the fundamental truth that Jake was the sun in our family solar system, and I was at best a distant planet. When college acceptance letters arrived, I received offers from 7 top universities, including 3 with partial scholarships. My parents seemed almost annoyed by the stack of large envelopes on the kitchen counter. "Do not expect us to pay for some fancy private school," my father warned, despite the fact that they had already started a college fund for Jake, who was still struggling through freshman algebra. I left for Northwestern University with 2 suitcases, $300 from my summer job, and a determination to never again measure my worth through their eyes. The day they dropped me at the dormitory, my mother hugged me briefly and said, "Do not forget to call your brother. He is really going to miss you." They were back in the car before I had finished unpacking. College became my first taste of true freedom. Without the constant comparison to Jake, I flourished both academically and socially. But freedom came with responsibility. My parents contributed exactly $0 toward my education, explaining they were saving for Jake's future. So, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously: morning shifts at the campus coffee shop, weekend administrative work at a local business, and late-night tutoring sessions. Despite the exhaustion of working 30 hours a week on top of a full course load, I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business administration and computer science. My parents attended graduation but left immediately after the ceremony to get back for Jake's summer baseball league game. When I tried to explain my job offers over lunch, my father checked his watch repeatedly, while my mother asked if I had met any nice young men who might have better prospects. My entry-level position at Apex Innovation Technologies paid barely enough to cover my studio apartment and student loan payments, but it was a foot in the door of the tech industry. I arrived an hour early every day, stayed late every evening, and volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. While colleagues complained about workloads, I saw each assignment as an opportunity to prove myself. 18 months of 80-hour work weeks nearly broke me physically, but my dedication paid off when I identified a critical inefficiency in our production pipeline. The solution I developed saved the company millions annually and earned me my first promotion to team lead at 25. The new position came with a modest salary increase that finally allowed me to stop eating ramen noodles for dinner every night. My parents remained thoroughly unimpressed. Computers, my father would sigh during our monthly phone calls. "I still do not understand why you did not go into something more stable like teaching." This despite the fact that I was now earning more than either of them. My mother's primary concern was whether my demanding schedule was scaring away potential husbands. Jake, meanwhile, had dropped out of community college after 3 semesters with no declared major. My parents described this as taking time to find his passion and promptly let him move back home, rent-free. He cycled through jobs at an alarming rate: retail, food delivery, cell phone sales, each lasting a few months before he quit or was fired for tardiness. When Apex launched a revolutionary software platform that I had helped develop, my promotion to Director of Product Development followed naturally. At 27, I was the youngest director in company history, managing a team of 30 developers and a multi-million-dollar budget. I bought my first condo, a modest 1-bedroom, that nevertheless felt like a palace after years of rental apartments with questionable plumbing. During one Sunday family call, I tried to share my excitement about the promotion. My mother interrupted with, "That is nice, dear, but did you hear Jake is thinking about going back to school? Maybe business like you. He has always been so good with people." The rest of the call was dedicated to Jake's potential and how they were researching scholarships for him. I stopped mentioning my career after that. The following year, I was approached by a headhunter representing Zenith Enterprises, Apex's largest competitor. They offered me a vice president position with a salary that made me choke on my coffee when I heard the number plus equity options that could be worth millions if the company continued its growth trajectory. After careful consideration and negotiation, I accepted the role. My new position came with immense responsibility and pressure, but also the resources to truly innovate. Under my leadership, our division developed technologies that positioned Zenith at the forefront of the industry. When Zenith merged with global tech giant Nexus Systems, creating one of the largest technology corporations in the world, the board began searching for a CEO who could navigate the complex integration of the companies. To my shock, I was shortlisted alongside external candidates with decades more experience. The interview process was brutal. 7 rounds with board members, investors, and executive teams from both companies. I prepared for weeks developing a comprehensive vision for the merged company's future that addressed everything from technical integration to cultural alignment. When the board chairman called to offer me the position, I was 30 years old and momentarily speechless. The salary bonuses and stock options were life-changing, but more meaningful was the vote of confidence from people I deeply respected. That evening alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel the pride I had been pushing down for years. I called my parents that weekend to share the news. CEO of a whole company, my father asked, sounding genuinely confused. Is it a startup or something? When I explained the size and scope of the corporation, there was a long pause before my mother said, "Well, that sounds very demanding. Will you have time to date?" The conversation quickly turned to Jake's newest venture. He was taking classes to become a real estate agent. "He is really finding himself now," my mother gushed. "He has such natural charisma. People just love him." After that call, I made a conscious decision to maintain privacy about my professional life. It was simpler than dealing with their dismissal, or potentially worse, their sudden interest, if they realized the financial implications of my position. I began declining their invitations for weekend visits, citing work commitments. Our contact dwindled to monthly calls that I scheduled between meetings. Meanwhile, I built what I thought of as my chosen family close friends, who celebrated my successes without resentment, colleagues, who challenged and respected me, and eventually a small circle of other female executives who understood the unique pressures I faced. These were people who saw me clearly and valued me for exactly who I was, not who they needed me to be. I established a comfortable routine, immersive, challenging work during the week, and relaxing weekends filled with friends, fitness classes, and occasional dates, though nothing serious developed romantically. I donated to causes I cared about, mentored young women in tech, and finally felt I was building a life that reflected my values rather than my family's expectations. December had always been complicated. Every year, my parents hosted a Christmas gathering at their suburban home, a tradition that dated back to my childhood. Every year, I dutifully attended solo, bringing expensive gifts that were received with polite thank yous before being set aside. Every year, I listened to extended conversations about Jake's potential and prospects, while fielding uncomfortable questions about my personal life. Last December began no differently. 3 weeks before Christmas, Jake called our parents with exciting news: he had started dating someone named Laura. This alone would not have been remarkable. Jake's relationships typically lasted about as long as his jobs, but apparently, this Laura was special. She was, according to my mother's breathless phone call, to me a director at a major tech company. "She is so accomplished," my mother said, her voice tinged with awe. "She has her own office and everything. Your father and I are just thrilled for Jake." "That is great," I replied automatically, adding another document to my review queue while balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder. "I look forward to meeting her at Christmas." "Laura might be just what Jake needs to finally find his path," my mother continued. "She seems very organized and motivated. Those qualities might rub off on him." I made appropriate noises of agreement while signing off on quarterly projections that would determine bonuses for 2,000 employees. My mother did not ask a single question about my work or life before ending the call. As the holiday approached, I arranged for my usual 2 days off work, the minimum I could take without causing major disruptions to ongoing projects. I purchased thoughtful gifts, a collector's edition of my father's favorite author's works, a cashmere sweater for my mother and for Jake, the latest gaming console he had been hinting about for months. I booked my flight, arranged for a rental car, and prepared myself mentally for the usual mixture of nostalgia and discomfort that characterized family gatherings. 1 week before Christmas, my father called. This was unusual enough to make me step out of a budget meeting to take it. His voice sounded strained. "Vanessa, we need to talk about Christmas this year," he began awkwardly. "There has been a slight change of plans." "Is everyone okay?" I asked, immediately concerned. "Is Mom sick?" No, nothing like that," he assured me quickly. "It is just, well, Jake is bringing Laura, and she works at some tech company. In management, apparently." I waited for him to continue, unsure what this had to do with me. "Your mother and I were thinking," he said after an uncomfortable pause, "that it might be better if you came for New Year's instead of Christmas this year." The conference room door opened behind me, and my assistant gestured about the waiting meeting. I held up one finger, trying to process what my father was saying. "You are uninviting me from Christmas," I asked, keeping my voice level. "Not uninviting," he corrected hastily. "Just rescheduling. We think it might be a bit awkward, with what you do for work and all. Laura is apparently very proud of her position, and we would not want her to feel intimidated." Before I could respond, I heard my mother's voice in the background, then the muffled sound of the phone changing hands. "Vanessa, honey," my mother said, her voice sweet in that particular way that always preceded something hurtful. "We are just trying to make sure Jake has his moment. You know how important this relationship is to him, and we would hate for anything to overshadow that. Laura is the first girl he has dated with a real career, and we want her to feel comfortable with the family." "And my presence would make her uncomfortable," I clarified, feeling a coldness spreading through my chest. "Well, you can be a bit intense about your work," my mother said delicately. "And you know how Jake gets when he feels compared to you. We just want everything to be perfect for him. You understand, right? You can still come for New Year's Day brunch." I found myself agreeing numbly, ending the call with mechanical pleasantries. I returned to my meeting smiling rigidly as I guided the discussion about resource allocation across 3 continents. Only my executive assistant noticed something was wrong, quietly placing a cup of tea at my elbow and rescheduling my afternoon appointments without being asked. That evening, the full impact hit me. After 32 years, nothing had changed. I was still the inconvenient daughter, the one whose achievements were threatening rather than celebrated. I was still expected to accommodate Jake's fragile ego, to make myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I called my best friend Zoe in tears. She arrived at my penthouse an hour later with 2 bottles of wine and unwavering support. "They banned you from Christmas because your brother's girlfriend has a mid-level management job," she clarified, outrage coloring her voice. "While you run a global corporation? That is Olympic-level delusion." "They do not really know what I do," I reminded her, wiping my eyes. "I stopped telling them years ago when it became clear they did not care." "That is not an excuse, that is part of the problem," Zoe insisted, pouring more wine. "Normal parents would be throwing parade-sized celebrations for what you have accomplished." We talked late into the night, and by morning I had made peace with the situation. I would respect the Christmas ban, but would not be attending the consolation New Year's brunch either. Instead, I booked a spa retreat for the holidays and arranged to have the gifts delivered to my parents' house with a polite note. On Christmas Day, I deliberately avoided social media, but curiosity eventually got the better of me. My mother had posted several photos of their celebration, Jake, beaming beside a tall woman with a professional smile, my parents looking proudly on the table, set with the special occasion china and crystal. The caption read, Perfect Christmas with Jake and his amazing girlfriend, Laura. So proud of these two power players. The absence of any mention of me was simultaneously painful and utterly predictable. I closed the app and focused on enjoying the massage I had scheduled, determined not to let their exclusion ruin my holiday. But something had shifted inside me, some last fragile hope that they might eventually see me clearly. In its place was a strange, sad acceptance, and the resolve to build my life without the validation I had unconsciously been seeking for so long. January and February passed in a blur of work. The company was expanding operations in Asia, and I spent 3 weeks in Singapore, Seoul, and Tokyo, establishing new offices. Upon returning to headquarters in early March, I threw myself into the strategic planning cycle, grateful for the all-consuming focus required. My parents called twice, leaving cheerful voicemails that made no reference to Christmas or my absence at New Year's. Quote, I did not return the calls. Jake texted on my birthday with a generic happy B-Day sis that required no response. The distance felt oddly liberating. One Tuesday, in mid-March, Jennifer Davies, our HR director, requested an urgent meeting. Jennifer rarely scheduled anything last minute, so I cleared 30 minutes between budget reviews to see her. We have received an interesting application for the senior product manager position, she said after pleasantries. The candidate has solid qualifications, good references from his last 2 positions, and an interesting note on his application. She slid a printed resume across my desk. I glanced down and felt the blood drain from my face. The name at the top read Jacob Wilson. He listed a potential conflict of interest, Jennifer continued, unaware of my shock. Family connection to CEO. I wanted to discuss the proper protocol for handling this application. I stared at the resume, trying to process what I was seeing. Jake had worked at 3 companies in the past year, each position showing progressively more responsibility in product marketing. His educational background listed a recently completed online business certification, but no college degree. Under skills, he claimed proficiency in several software platforms our company used. Did he specifically mention me by name? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Jennifer looked slightly uncomfortable. Not exactly. When I called to schedule his preliminary interview, he asked if there were any fast-track options available for candidates with connections to senior leadership. I explained our standard process, and he mentioned being related to someone in the executive team, but did not specify who. This created both a professional and personal dilemma. Our company had strict anti-nepotism policies, but they primarily addressed direct reporting relationships. There was no explicit prohibition against hiring qualified family members into separate departments. The bigger question was how Jake had found his way to this specific application. As far as I knew, he had no idea where I worked, let alone my position. I will need to recuse myself from the initial hiring process, I told Jennifer after consideration. Please conduct the standard screening and departmental interviews. If he reaches the final round, I will disclose the relationship and conduct the executive interview as I would for any candidate. Our ethics policy allows this as long as there is transparency. Jennifer nodded, making notes. Should I inform the interview panel about the connection? No, I decided. Judge him solely on his qualifications. Document everything thoroughly. I want this process to be completely fair and defensible. After Jennifer left, I closed my office door and Googled Jake's name. His LinkedIn profile showed the same employment history as his resume, though, with considerably more embellished descriptions of his responsibilities. There was no mention of me or any family connections in his public profile. I spent the next week distracted, wondering when and how Jake would discover my position. Jennifer provided updates on his progress through the hiring pipeline, He had passed the initial phone screening and completed the first round of interviews with the product team. Surprisingly, the feedback was largely positive. He had apparently prepared well and demonstrated legitimate knowledge of product management principles. This created conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt a strange pride that Jake was showing genuine competence. On the other, the timing and circumstances raised red flags. Why? Our company. Why? Now? And how much did he actually know about my role? The situation required consultation with more than just HR. I scheduled a confidential meeting with our chief legal officer and ethics officer, explaining the unique circumstances. Both agreed that the most transparent approach was to continue the standard process, but ensure I was not the sole decision-maker if Jake reached the final rounds. "We can add an additional executive interviewer," suggested Patricia Gonzalez, our CLO, "that provides an independent assessment and protects both you and the company from any appearance of impropriety." 2 more weeks passed, and Jake continued advancing through the interview stages. The department head, who would be his direct supervisor, was impressed with his creative approach to product positioning and his apparent enthusiasm for our company's mission. I received the interview notes and was surprised by the thoughtful, articulate responses attributed to my brother. This was not the Jake I knew, or perhaps it was a Jake I had never been allowed to know. The final executive interview was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. I arranged for our chief marketing officer to join me, briefing her on the situation without revealing my personal history with Jake. My executive assistant, who knew more about my family dynamics than anyone at the company, gave me a sympathetic look when confirming the appointment. "Would you like me to stay late in case you need anything?" after she offered. I smiled gratefully, but declined. Whatever happened, this was something I would need to process alone. The night before the interview, I barely slept. I rehearsed professional questions prepared for various scenarios and tried to anticipate Jake's reaction. Would he be angry? Embarrassed? Would he try to leverage our relationship? Would he immediately withdraw his application? By morning, I felt exhausted but resolved to handle the situation with the same professionalism I brought to all aspects of my job. Friday afternoon arrived with unsettling speed. From my office window, I watched Jake enter our building at 1:45, 15 minutes early for his 2 o'clock interview. Even from 20 floors up, I recognized his walk, the same confident swagger he had developed in high school. He wore a new suit, charcoal gray and well-tailored, suggesting he had spent considerably on this interview appearance. Surveillance cameras tracked his progress through security, the visitor badge check-in, and his escort to the 18th floor where the preliminary discussions would take place. I received text updates from the department heads who met with him. The conversations were going well. He was asking intelligent questions about team structure and development methodology. He seemed genuinely excited about the company's mission. At 3:30, my phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer. Final interview in executive boardroom in 15 minutes. CMO, already there. I gathered my notes, straightened my blazer, and took the private elevator to the 22nd floor. Our chief marketing officer, Diane Reeves, was reviewing Jake's resume when I entered the boardroom. "His background is a bit non-traditional," she commented, "but his ideas about the consumer electronics vertical are surprisingly innovative. I am curious to see how he handles strategic questions." I nodded, taking a seat at the head of the table, my back to the panoramic windows that showcased the city skyline. Diane positioned herself to my right, and we arranged the interview materials between us. At precisely 3:45, the boardroom door opened. Jennifer entered first, followed by Jake. His expression was confident, almost cocky, as he strode into the room, but that changed the instant his eyes met mine. The transformation would have been comical in any other context. His face cycled rapidly through confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally a dawning horror. He stopped mid-stride mouth, actually dropping open. "Vanessa," he blurted, "what are you doing here?" I maintained a neutral expression. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wilson. I am Vanessa Wilson, CEO of Nexus Zenith Technologies. Please have a seat." Jennifer, consummate professional that she was, betrayed no surprise at this revelation. She simply gestured to the chair across from me and excused herself, closing the door quietly behind her. Jake remained frozen for several seconds before mechanically moving to the indicated chair. His eyes darted around the boardroom, taking in the executive trappings, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the subtle displays of corporate success. "You are the CEO," he repeated slowly, "of this entire company." "Yes," I confirmed, then gestured to my colleague. "This is Diane Reeves, our Chief Marketing Officer. She will be joining us for this interview." Diane extended her hand, which Jake shook automatically, his eyes never leaving my face. "I do not understand," he said. "How long have you? Why did you never—" "Mr. Wilson," I interrupted gently, but firmly, "we have 30 minutes scheduled for this interview to discuss your qualifications for the Senior Product Manager position. Would you prefer to proceed, or would you like to reschedule?" This professional framing seemed to snap him back to the reality of the situation. He straightened in his chair, adjusted his tie, and attempted to recover his composure. "Of course, let us proceed," he said, his voice only slightly strained. "I apologize for my surprise. I was not expecting to see my sister today." For transparency, I addressed Diane. "As you can see, Mr. Wilson is my brother. I have recused myself from the earlier stages of the interview process to avoid any conflict of interest. However, company policy requires CEO approval for all senior management positions." Diane nodded. "Thank you for clarifying. Mr. Wilson, shall we begin with your interest in this position?" The interview proceeded with surface-level professionalism, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. Jake attempted to answer the technical questions competently, but his earlier confidence had evaporated. Twice, he tried to reference our relationship indirectly, as someone who has grown up understanding leadership, and later, my family background has given me insight into executive thinking. Each time, I redirected to specific questions about product lifecycle management or cross-functional team coordination. His answers became increasingly scattered as the interview progressed, his earlier preparation clearly derailed by the shock of discovering my position. When we reached the case study portion where candidates needed to analyze a hypothetical product launch scenario, Jake struggled visibly. The thoughtful approach he had reportedly shown in earlier interviews was replaced by vague generalities and nervous glances in my direction. After 45 minutes, Diane wrapped up her questions and excused herself, explaining she had another commitment. As the door closed behind her, Jake's professional facade crumbled entirely. "What the hell, Vanessa?" he hissed, leaning forward. "You are the CEO of a major corporation, and you never thought to mention it to your family." "Would that have mattered?" I asked quietly. "When have you or our parents ever shown genuine interest in my career?" "That is not fair," he protested. "We always knew you were doing well in tech or whatever. But CEO, that is a whole different level." I maintained my professional composure. "Jake, I need to ask, why did you apply for this specific company? How much did you know about my position here?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I knew you worked for Nexus Zenith. Laura mentioned it once. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Laura, your Christmas girlfriend. She worked here. Jake shifted uncomfortably. She was in your marketing department for about 6 months last year. Got fired in November for some ethics thing. She was pretty bitter about it, said the leadership was toxic. When she met me and realized my last name, she put it together that we might be related. She thought it was hilarious that I had no idea what you really did. The revelation stung more than it should have. So you applied here because... He shrugged, some of his usual bravado returning. Why not? I am qualified. The position matches my experience. And yeah, I thought maybe having a connection would not hurt. I did not know you were the actual CEO, though. I figured maybe a department head or something. Did Mom and Dad know? About where I work? What I do? Jake looked away. Laura met them at Thanksgiving. She might have mentioned something. I do not know what they know. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of miscommunication and willful ignorance hanging between us. What happens now? Jake finally asked. With the job, I mean. The same thing that would happen with any candidate, I replied evenly. HR will collect feedback from all interviewers, including mine, and make a determination based on qualifications and fit. I will not be the sole decision maker. But you could put in a good word, he pressed. Come on, Vanessa. We are family. Which is exactly why I need to be especially careful about showing no favoritism, I explained. The process will be fair, Jake. That is all I can promise. He stood abruptly, frustration evident in every line of his body. Unbelievable. All these years you have been holding out on us, playing some weird game, and now you cannot even help your own brother. I remained seated, maintaining the physical and emotional high ground. I have not been playing games, Jake. I have been building a career while being consistently dismissed by my family. I stopped sharing because no one was interested in hearing. Well, we are interested now, he said with a harsh laugh. Wait until Mom and Dad find out. They are going to flip. His thinly veiled threat hung in the air. I simply nodded, ending the conversation by standing and extending my hand formally. Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Wilson. HR will be in touch regarding next steps. Jake stared at my outstretched hand for a long moment before shaking it briefly. At the door, he paused and turned back. For what it is worth, he said, his voice slightly less hostile, some of us were actually trying to make something of ourselves too. Not all of us had your brains or your... whatever it is that makes you so perfect at everything. Before I could respond, he was gone. I returned to my office, closed the door, and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to process the encounter. Then I called Jennifer and instructed her to handle Jake's application according to standard protocols, with no special treatment in either direction. The company would make its decision based solely on merit, as it always did. That evening, I poured myself a generous glass of wine and waited for the inevitable fallout. I did not have to wait long. The storm broke less than 24 hours later. Saturday morning, my cell phone exploded with notifications. 6 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, and a series of increasingly dramatic text messages. Jake told us everything. Call us immediately. How could you keep this from your family? We need to talk about this situation with your brother. Vanessa, this is serious. Call us now. I silenced my phone and went for a 5-mile run, giving myself space to prepare mentally for the conversation ahead. When I returned to my penthouse apartment, I showered, made coffee, and was just considering returning their calls when my building's security desk phoned up. Miss Wilson, there are 2 people in the lobby claiming to be your parents. They are quite insistent about seeing you. Should I send them up? I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they would show up unannounced. Yes, please escort them up. Thank you. I quickly tidied the already immaculate living room more from nervous energy than necessity. My apartment, occupying half of the top floor of one of the city's most exclusive residential buildings, was professionally decorated in a minimalist style that emphasized the floor-to-ceiling windows and panoramic city views. I rarely entertained here, preferring to keep my personal space private, which made this invasion feel particularly intrusive. The elevator announced their arrival with a soft chime. I opened the door to find my parents standing there looking simultaneously angry and uncomfortable. My mother's eyes immediately began cataloging the expensive furnishings, while my father seemed fixated on the view beyond the windows. "You might have told us you moved," my mother said by way of greeting. "We had to Google you to find this address." "Please come in," I replied, stepping aside. "Would you like coffee?" They entered cautiously, as though stepping into a foreign embassy. My mother perched on the edge of the white leather sofa, while my father wandered to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. "Nice place," he commented, surveying the city spread below. "Must have cost a fortune." I ignored the implied question, serving coffee in handcrafted ceramic mugs before taking a seat in the armchair opposite my mother. "I assume Jake told you about the job interview." "He told us a lot more than that," my mother said, her voice taking on the wounded tone. "I knew so well. He told us you are the CEO of a major corporation, that you have been hiding your success from us for years, that you deliberately kept us in the dark about your life." "I did not hide anything," I corrected calmly. "I simply stopped volunteering information that was consistently met with disinterest." "Disinterest?" My father turned from the window, indignation coloring his face. "We are your parents. Of course we are interested in your life." "Are you?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time either of you asked me a genuine question about my work, my achievements, my challenges?" They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We always knew you were doing well," my mother said defensively. "You were always so independent, so capable. We did not think you needed our involvement." "Not needing involvement is different from not wanting acknowledgement," I pointed out. "Every milestone in my career was dismissed or redirected to concerns about my personal life or comparisons to Jake's potential." My father sighed heavily, moving to sit beside my mother. "We may have underestimated your accomplishments, but keeping your position secret feels deliberate, Vanessa. Why would you not tell your own family that you had reached such heights?" The question was so lacking in self-awareness that I almost laughed. "The Christmas party," I said instead. "You uninvited me because Jake's girlfriend worked in middle management at a tech company, and you were worried I might overshadow her. How would you have reacted if you had known I was actually the CEO?" My mother had the grace to flush slightly. "That was a misunderstanding. We just wanted Jake to have his moment." "Jake has had all the moments," I replied, keeping my voice level. "Every moment for as long as I can remember. My achievements have been footnotes at best in our family story." "That is not fair," my father protested. "We have always been proud of you." "Proud in absence, perhaps. Proud without acknowledgement or celebration, or even basic curiosity." An uncomfortable silence fell. My mother fidgeted with her coffee cup, not drinking from it. My father's eyes kept returning to the view, mentally calculating property values, no doubt. "Well," my mother finally said with forced brightness, "the important thing is that we know now. And we are very, very proud. Extremely proud. Our daughter a CEO, it is remarkable." "Truly impressive," my father agreed, his tone shifting to something that set off warning bells in my mind. "You must be doing quite well financially." And there it was, the real reason for their sudden interest. I waited, saying nothing. "Jake mentioned that you live in the penthouse," my mother continued, glancing around. This whole floor. Half I corrected. The other side is a separate unit. My father cleared his throat. Speaking of Jake, we were hoping you might reconsider his application. He really needs this opportunity, Vanessa. Things have been tough for him lately. What happened with Laura, I asked, though I could guess. My mother's expression soured. They broke up a few weeks ago. She was not right for him anyway. Very critical personality. She actually called us after they split, my father added with a frown. Tried to tell us some nonsense about Jake's character. Very unprofessional. The pieces continued falling into place. Laura had apparently tried to warn my parents about Jake just as she had inadvertently revealed my position to him. Both revelations had been ignored until they became useful. I cannot discuss Jake's application, I said firmly. Our HR department handles all hiring decisions according to company policy. But surely you have some influence, my mother pressed. He is your brother. Which is exactly why I need to be especially careful about showing no favoritism. I repeated the same words I had told Jake. My father shifted tactics. Vanessa, we need to be honest with you about something. Your mother and I are in a bit of financial difficulty. My mother shot him a look, but did not contradict him. The house needs a new roof, he continued, and property taxes have gone up significantly. We had to take out a second mortgage last year to help Jake with some expenses. I see, I said neutrally. We would never ask outright, my mother hurried to add. But since you are in such a fortunate position now, we thought perhaps you might want to help your family. After all, we did raise you, put you through school. I could not let that pass. You did not put me through school. I worked 3 jobs to pay my own tuition and graduated with $40,000 in student loans, which I paid off myself. Well, we raised you, my father amended, gave you the foundation for your success. And now that you are doing so well, it seems only natural that you might want to give back to the people who made it all possible. The naked entitlement of the statement was breathtaking. After decades of favoring Jake, dismissing my achievements, and most recently banning me from Christmas, they now felt entitled to financial support based solely on biological connection. I need to step out for a moment, I said, rising from my chair. I have an important call to make. Please excuse me. I walked to my home office and closed the door, leaving them to exchange whispers in the living room. They almost certainly assumed I was calling my financial advisor or bank to arrange a transfer. I was making a very different kind of call. When I returned 10 minutes later, my parents were examining the art on my walls, price tags practically visible in their eyes. Have you made arrangements? My mother asked eagerly. Yes, I replied, but probably not the kind you were expecting. I have just spoken with Dr. Eleanor Hayes, I said, resuming my seat. She is one of the most respected family therapists in the city, and she has agreed to see us for an emergency session this afternoon at 4 o'clock, Eleanor. My parents exchanged confused glances. A therapist, my father repeated. We do not need therapy. We need financial assistance, I finished for him. Yes, that was clear. But I am not offering money. I am offering something much more valuable, an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. My mother's face tightened. Vanessa, this is not appropriate. We are not mentally ill. We just need some help with expenses. Therapy is not for mental illness, I corrected gently. It is for improving communication, understanding patterns of behavior, and creating healthier dynamics. Our family has 32 years of dysfunctional patterns to address. This is ridiculous, my father sputtered. After everything we have done for you. That is exactly the kind of statement we need to examine, I interrupted. What exactly do you believe you have done for me that entitles you to my financial support, especially after decades of favoring Jake and dismissing my achievements. The directness of the question left them momentarily speechless. "Here is my offer," I continued. "I will pay for 6 months of weekly family therapy sessions for all 4 of us. If you choose to participate fully and honestly in that process, and if at the end of that time we have established a healthier relationship, I will consider helping with specific documented financial needs, not emotional blackmail or open-ended support. And if we refuse this therapy," my father asked stiffly. "Then nothing changes," I replied simply. "I continue my life as I have been. You continue yours. We maintain the distant relationship we have had for years. I will not be manipulated or guilted into financial support without addressing the underlying issues." "This is emotional blackmail," my mother accused. "No," I corrected. "Emotional blackmail would be saying, 'We raised you, so you owe us.' What I am offering is a path to genuine healing and relationship, not a transaction." My parents conferred in hushed, agitated whispers. Finally, my father turned back to me. "And you would pay for these sessions?" "Yes. Dr. Hayes is expecting us at 4 today for an initial consultation. The decision is yours." To my surprise, they agreed, though, with obvious reluctance. That first session was painfully awkward. Dr. Hayes, a serene woman in her 50s, created a neutral space where each of us could speak without interruption. My parents were defensive. Jake was sullen, and I struggled to articulate decades of hurt without sounding petty or vindictive. But something unexpected happened near the end of that first session. When Dr. Hayes asked each of us to name one thing we wished the others understood about us, Jake said something that shifted my perspective entirely. "I wish they understood that being the favorite is its own kind of prison," he said, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Everyone expects you to be special, but no one ever shows you how. They just keep making excuses when you fail." In that moment, I saw my brother clearly, perhaps for the first time. The golden child status that I had envied had its own damaging effects. While I had developed independence and resilience from being overlooked, Jake had never been allowed to experience consequences or develop his own identity separate from our parents' expectations. The therapy process was difficult and often painful. My father initially resisted attending sessions, but participating minimally. My mother cried, frequently oscillating between defensive justification of her parenting and genuine remorse. Jake's involvement was perhaps the most surprising. After his job application was rejected, he did receive an offer from another company based partly on skills he had genuinely developed. He seemed motivated to understand his role in our family dysfunction. Dr. Hayes helped us identify the patterns that had defined our relationships. My parents acknowledged their favoritism, though they struggled to recognize its full impact. Jake and I began having conversations outside of therapy, cautiously building a sibling relationship that had never really existed before. At work, I maintained strict professional boundaries. Jake's job application was handled according to standard procedures, and while he was not selected for the position the feedback provided, helped him secure a role at another technology company where he could develop his skills without the shadow of family connections. The 6-month mark approached more quickly than I expected. We had made progress, though there were still fragile areas and occasional setbacks. My parents had begun asking genuine questions about my work and life-making efforts to show interest without ulterior motives. Jake and I had established a tentative friendship meeting occasionally for coffee to discuss industry trends and personal growth. When Dr. Hayes asked in our final scheduled session whether we wished to continue therapy, the unanimous decision to proceed was perhaps the strongest evidence of how far we had come. My parents had taken steps to address their financial issues, independently working with a financial advisor I had recommended, but not directly funded. They had downsized to a smaller house, reducing their mortgage payment and property tax burden. The following Christmas looked very different from the one that had started this journey. We gathered at a neutral location, a private dining room at a restaurant I had selected. There were no banned family members, no false pretenses, and no hidden agendas. The conversation was sometimes stilted, occasionally uncomfortable, but fundamentally honest. My professional life continued to thrive. Under my leadership, Nexus Zenith Technologies expanded into new markets and developed innovations that genuinely improved people's lives. I was recognized in business publications and industry awards acknowledgments that felt meaningful but no longer essential to my sense of self-worth. The most profound change, however, was internal. I no longer measured my value through my family's recognition or lack thereof. I had learned to appreciate their efforts toward change while accepting their limitations. I had discovered that family relationships, like all relationships, require boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect to be healthy. On a personal level, I began dating more openly, no longer fitting romantic prospects around an exhausting work schedule. I cultivated deeper friendships and community connections, recognizing that success without meaningful relationships was ultimately hollow. Jake found his own path, one suited to his actual talents rather than our parents' expectations. He discovered a genuine aptitude for user experience design, an area where his natural empathy and creativity could shine. We became professional colleagues in the broader industry, occasionally consulting on projects or referring opportunities to each other. My parents never fully understood the depth of their favoritism or its impact, but they made genuine efforts to distribute their attention and affection more equitably. They began celebrating my accomplishments, albeit sometimes awkwardly, and allowed Jake to experience natural consequences rather than constant rescue. The journey was not perfect or complete, far from it. We still had moments of falling into old patterns, still had conversations that ended in hurt feelings or misunderstandings. But we had tools now to recognize these patterns and address them honestly rather than allowing resentment to fester. The truth I discovered through this process was both simple and profound. Self-worth cannot come from external validation, especially from those unable or unwilling to provide it. Real healing begins with accepting people for who they actually are, not who we need them to be, and then making conscious choices about the role they play in our lives. I no longer needed my parents to see my value in order to know it myself. I no longer needed Jake to fail in order to feel successful. And perhaps most importantly, I no longer needed to diminish my light to make others comfortable with their own shadows. If my story resonates with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who could not celebrate your success? How did you handle it? Please like this video. If you found value in my experience, subscribe if you want to hear more stories of overcoming family dynamics, and share with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by their family's ability to recognize it. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that sometimes the family we create through meaningful connections can be as important as the family we are born into.